karatasi ya kwanza. CRE paper 1. Mention 7 effects of Bible translation into African languages. 7 marks. So, what were the results of Bible translation into African languages? Number 1, it caused enthusiasm for formal education. Reading the Bible enabled people to realize, or rather you can just say it enabled people to detect fruits in preaching. The word of God reached many in their own languages. It gave room for research of African culture, or rather you can just say research for African religion. Africans demanded leadership. It created employment. Also, another effect of Bible translation is that it led to the establishment of printing institutions. The missionaries acquitted themselves African wives because now they could be able to use the African language due to the translation. Another result of Bible translation is that it accelerated the development of African independent churches, or rather it also accelerated, that is speeding up the development of African schools. It eroded illiteracy. It triggered evangelization like bushfire, and lastly it enhanced the spread of Christianity. Question 1b. Identify any 6 ways in which God speaks to people today through the Bible. 6 marks. So he speaks to people through the 10 commandments. Remember, the 10 commandments give direction to Christians. Also through extraordinary events, through allegories, through dreams and visions. People are separating dreams and visions, but they are one. Through prophets, through the Holy Spirit, through the person of Jesus Christ. And lastly, through the Bible. And those people who are talking about through prayers, you had to say through what? Answered prayers. Prayers alone is not a point. You have to say through answered prayers. Question 1c. Outline any 7 differences between the first and the second accounts of creation. We looked at it. Kindly read your notes because most of you forgot. But a good number, were able to remember all the differences. There was also a mix-up in most of your answers. So in the first account, the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, while it's not mentioned in the second account. In the first account, God appreciates everything that he created, while it's not mentioned in the second account. God took 6 days in the first account to do what? To create. But there is no mention of days in the second account. God created in the union with the Trinity in the first account, while he is alone in the second account. God created human beings for what? Procreation in the first account. Whereas in the second account, he created them for what? Companionship. You find out that in the second account, there is mention of the forbidden tree. But it is not mentioned in the first what? Account. In the second account, man is given the responsibility to till the land. but not in the first what? In the first account. The 4 rivers, that is the Tigris, Euphrates, Gishon, and Piton, are mentioned in the second account, but they are omitted in the first account. Also in the first account, there is a day of rest, that is the Sabbath day, which is not mentioned in the second what? Account. In the first account, God names what he creates, while man is given the responsibility to name what God created in the second account. Also, in the first account, creation is out of divine command, let there be. But in the second account, creation of man is created out of what? Dust. Some people were saying in the first account, God created man through his likeness and what? Through his image and what? Likeness. And then they're saying in the second account, it was created from dust. I was also giving. In the first account, male and female were created at the same time. While in the second account, man is created first and woman is created out of man's what? Ribs. The first account is in a chronological order of events. There's day 1, day 2, day 3, like that, which is opposed to the second account of creation, which does not have what? Order. Question 2a. Enumerate the activities carried out by the Israelites on the night of the Passover, 7 marks. Here I wanted you to mention the activity and to do what? To also say what it meant. So for that you can get a full mark. Can you learn to be doing that? If you ask question on the night of the Passover, so that you can get a full mark. Those were the instructions according to the marking scheme. So each family was supposed to get a young animal, a goat or a ram. The young animal signified what? Innocence of the sacrifice. Also, the animal was supposed to be without blemish. Or rather, you can just say the animal to be sacrificed was without blemish. Also, it signified innocence of the sacrifice. There was smearing of blood on the lintels. Or rather, some people are saying there was smearing of the blood on the doorposts by the Israelites. Yes? This was the sign of identification. They were to roast whole the slaughtered animal. This was to show that they were in a what? In a hurry. They were to eat with unleavened bread because there was no time to ferment. They were also to eat it with bitter herbs, and they ate it with bitter herbs in order to show the bitter experience of slavery in what? In Egypt. They were to dress up and pick their luggage to show the readiness over their journey. The Israelite women were supposed to borrow jewelry from the Egyptian what? Women. And this was to act as compensation for the free labor they'd offered. The Israelites were also supposed to remain indoors until morning, and this was to be protected from the angel of what? Of death. Question 2b, state the importance of Exodus to Israelites. Number 1, it marked the end of the Israelite suffering, or the end of oppression. It also marked the choosing of Israelites as a special nation. Or you can just say choosing them as God's nation. Also, Exodus was a fulfillment of the promises God gave to who? Abraham. Exodus taught Israelites that human obedience to God is mandatory. And also the Exodus was important because Israelites received the 10 what? Commandments. The 10 commandments were supposed to guide them in their relationships. The Exodus also made the Israelites to understand the nature of God. It also united Israel as a nation, and it identified Moses as God's chosen leader. It also proved to the Israelites that God was more supreme than the Egyptian gods. Question 2c, mention why God called Abraham. 6 marks. When you're told to mention why God called Abraham, kindly relate the answers with the promises that God gave to Abraham. Number 1 was to extend God's salvation to all nations of the world. That is why God called Abraham. To fulfill the promises he had made. Also to show, or rather you can just say to signify the reward of obeying and having faith in God. Also it was to enter into a personal relationship with humankind. So he called Abraham in order to enter into a personal relationship with human beings. Because remember that the relationship had been what? Destroyed. He also called Abraham to give him a what? A son. He called Abraham so that he can stop being a moon worshipper and start worshipping what? Yahweh. Question 3a, state the promises of God to David through Prophet Nathan. 7 marks. So here people confused. I did not ask about the promises God gave to who? To Abraham. This was God to who? To David. And there was nowhere where it was what? His name would be famous. There is nowhere his name would be famous. That is Abraham. So God promises to David are God would give Israel their own land. David's son Solomon would build the temple for God. God would back David forever. That is, he would back him up forever. He would punish David's son when they will destroy, just as the father what? Corrects his son. But most of you are writing this point even more correctly. The relationship between God and David's sons will be like that one of the father and what? Son. David and his descendants would receive everlasting blessings. David's house would rule forever. God would bury David with his ancestors. He did not say, because people were writing there, he would die. You remember the God's promises to Abraham that he will die in peace, yes? Yes, that is about Abraham. About David is that God would bury David with his what? Ancestors. God would keep David's dynasty strong. And he would shield David from his foes. David would be a renowned king all over Israel. And he would safeguard Israel from her oppressions during the reign of David. Question 3b. State how King Jeroboam promoted idolatry in Israel. 7 marks. So here, I discovered that people are confusing Jeroboam with Elijah. I don't know why. And people did not even know which part of, after there was the parting of the two nations, Which side was Jeroboam, northern or southern? Northern. How do you know? Jeroboam, J comes before what? R. So J is north, R is what? South, Rehoboam. Are you understanding? That's how you can easily know. So King Jeroboam molded 2 golden calves. He placed one at Bethel and another in Dan, thus ignoring Jerusalem as the what? Yes, he molded 2 golden calves. Sorry? Oh, J and R. Sasa, when you are in the alphabet, which comes first, J or R? J and then what? R. So there is Jeroboam, which starts with a J, and Rehoboam, which starts with a what? R. So J comes first. J is the northern. Are you understanding? And then R is the southern. So Jeroboam was in the northern, and Rehoboam was in the what? Southern. Thank you. So some people here were confused. Instead of saying the golden calves, they were saying the golden bulls. There's someone who look at your answers. You'll be shocked. And I was also ignoring the Jerusalem as a worship center as another point. But you see, it's one point. So placing the 2 golden calves there, it was ignoring Jerusalem as a worship center. He himself worshipped idols. Jeroboam led Israelites into offering sacrifice to the idols. So offering sacrifices. He also chose non-Levite priests. That is, he was getting priests from ordinary families to serve in the worship centers, which was against the what? The covenant way of life. He also instituted religious festivals in the month of his choice. Another point that is not here is that he built high places for the worship of the idols, like hilltops. Question 3C. Describe how Elijah's prophetic mission is relevant to Christians today. 6 marks. When you're told anything how it is relevant to Christians, you start Christians should, or you say they should. Some of you are saying we. If you start with we, no one is going to even read it. So number 1, Christians should put their hope in God, since He is the provider. Remember, He provided food to Elijah when he was at the what? The desert. They should live an honest life, or rather a holy life, just like what? Elijah. They should assess situations and make sound decisions. Like Elijah chose to worship God regardless of the widespread of idolatry in Israel. So Christians should assess situations, and then you make sound decisions. They shouldn't misuse their authority, for it is God-given. In Elijah's prophetic mission, who misused his authority or her authority? Jezebel, yes? When he forged the signature in order to get rid of Naboth. They should be ready to defend the defenseless, or rather you can just say they should be ready to defend the weak, just as Elijah defended the poor Naboth. They should also remain in absolute faith, even when there are challenges. Christians should not surrender at all costs, but should pray to God. Just like Elijah. You should not surrender even if everyone else is being killed. And then lastly, Christians should boldly condemn injustices in the society. Question 4a. Identify ways through which God's prophets in the Old Testament delivered their message to the people. I don't know whether people never saw the Old Testament, because people are talking about things which are in the New Testament, that is in the early church. So how did they deliver their messages? Through storytelling, through the scribes, through the scrolls. It's the Old Testament. Stone tablet, I was accepting. Through songs, through wonders, symbolic actions, through preaching. Remember, there was preaching in the synagogues. Question 4b. Sorry? I said through symbolic actions, wonders, songs, scribes, scrolls, storytelling. Describe the hypocritical religion in Israel during time of Amos. Here people, you are told, students listen, you are told hypocritical what? Religion, not the whole, because people are talking about the scales. The scales, the weighing of the scales by the merchants is not about religion. And people are writing. So I gather that you did not read and understand the what? The question. So number 1, they practice religious syncretism by worshipping idols. That is, they were worshipping God or Yahweh at the same time worshipping idols. That is, they practice the religious syncretism. They also defile the altar of God. How did they defile the altar? Yes, temple prostitution. They also promoted idolatry worship. There was oppression of the poor. That is, they saw social injustices, for example, oppression. Their tithe was stolen. And the animals that they offered for sacrifices were what? Unclean. So also the people of Israel rebelled against Yahweh in thoughts and in their deeds. And also the religious ceremonies were superficial and elaborating. So they did not fully commit to the religious ceremonies. Question 4c. Give the significance of Prophet Amos' vision of the crooked wall and plumb line. 6 marks. So, significance. What does significance mean? Importance. Even looking at it, what did the crooked wall symbolize? It symbolized the crooked ways of the people of what? Israel. So the crooked wall symbolized the crooked ways of the Israelites. And the plumb line signified that God was checking the straightness of the people. That was point number 2. People of Israel were built using a plumb line because they were God's chosen ones. The crooked people of Israel would be destroyed because of their actions. That is point number 4. And also you should note that Amos kept quiet, for the people were too sinful that they could not be corrected. Question 5a. Identify any 6 ways in which Prophet Jeremiah described idolatry in Israel. What did Jeremiah? The ways that Jeremiah described idolatry in Israel. Number 1, he described idolatry as characterized by worship of fertility gods. Worship of fertility gods. Rebellion against Yahweh. He also called it moral corruption because it was led by human sacrifices. It was also referred to as vanity. Permit of vanity. That is, the Israelites had become worshipless. Jeremiah also said or called it abandonment of Israelites' first love. That is, they had refused to remain faithful to God. They had failed to remain faithful to God. Defilement of Holy Land, that's another point. That is, he also described idolatry as useless because the imported gods with a small g, which were imported, could not serve them in the time of what? Trouble. Question 5b. Explain Jeremiah's teaching on judgment and punishment. So he said that God would use a foreign nation to destroy the city. Number 2, he also said that God would bring disaster from the north. Remember, this disaster from the north will destroy also the what? The city. He said the punishment would inflict pain just as what? A pain of woman in labor. There are like 3 people who wrote that point. I liked it. So it will inflict much pain as the pain of a woman in labor. Jeremiah also taught that the Babylonians would attack Judah. The graves would open, that's another point, and the kings, priests, and prophets' bones would be exhumed and exposed to the sun because they had worshipped idolatry. There's also someone who wrote the point about exhuming. So the graves would open, and the kings, priests. So you can just write the kings' bones would be exhumed and be exposed to the sun. As rubbish. This was punishment for idolatry. He also said that God would send numerous snakes and vipers that will not be charmed. He said that the people of Israel would be captured and deported to exile for 70 years. But there's someone who mistook and wrote how many years? 7. And I corrected. I don't know who that is. So they will be deported to exile for 70 years. And there, God would send what? Famine, drought among the people. So he said that God would kill his people by sword while in captivity. And that is when he said that the people would scatter. Like a pear that is driven by the desert wind. So the people would scatter. He said the punishment would still stand. Even the greatest prophets do not intervene. And he gave examples of Moses and who? Samuel. Very good. So he said the punishment would still stand, even if the greatest of the prophets intervened, like Moses and Samuel. He said that Judah's sins were written in their hearts because they kept on singing. They were sinning. Question 5c. Give any 7 ways in which Nehemiah addressed the problems he faced as a governor of Judah. Most of you misread this question. You are being asked here how Nehemiah addressed the problems. What did he do to address the problems? Most people were writing the word, the problems of Nehemiah. So kindly don't read one area. So number 1, what he did, he purified the office of priesthood and the Levites. He warned people against marrying foreigners. And he did this by excommunicating Eliashib, who was married to a daughter of Sanballat, who was a Samaritan governor. So he warned people against marrying foreigners and excommunicated Eliashib. He also stationed his personal guards to prevent leaders from entering the temple on Sabbath. So here you have to remember personal guards. So he stationed his personal guards to prevent the leaders from entering the temple on Sabbath. He also warned the people against defiling the Sabbath day because God's wrath would befall them. So they were not supposed to defile the Sabbath day. He also, in order for distribution of resources to go on well, he appointed a panel of 4 people to supervise the distribution of resources. He restored the Levites and the singers to their rightful positions. Remember the first point I said he purified the priesthood of the Levites, but now he also restored the Levites in their rightful positions. He purified the temple by expelling who? Tobiah out of the temple. And he then ordered the cleansing of the temple. So that is how he purified the temple, by expelling Tobiah. And he ordered the temple to be cleansed. He also denounced relationship with foreign communities. For example, the Moabites and the Amorites. Question 6a. Give 6 reasons why ancestors were venerated in traditional African culture. 6 marks. Number 1, by mentioning their names during prayer. So that was observed. That is the mentioning of names. They were also welcomed in communal practices. Children were named after them. Rituals were performed to strengthen their bond. Most people talked about the libations which were poured to appease them. And also people sought them, that they looked for them for help through religious specialists. Another question that you misunderstood is question 6b. Identify any 7 characteristics of communities in African traditional society. 7 marks. Characteristics are features. Yes? You are being asked what is the main feature of a community. How do you know this is a community? Yes? Number 1, they share a common what? Ancestor. They share a unique language. They also occupy a particular geographical area. Another characteristic of a community, it includes both the living, yes, the dead, and the what? Unborn. That's another feature of a community in the traditional African society. And also the climatic conditions of a particular community in a particular community dictate the economic activity. So the economic activity depends on the what? Climatic conditions experienced. That's why I'm saying climatic conditions dictate the economic activity. Also, a community has a clear social political organization. And lastly, it has a distinctive way of life. For example, customs, taboo, and rules. Question 6C. Mention any 7 factors that have led to sexual immorality among the youth in Kenya today. Why is there sexual immorality? Number one, there is and make sure, because we don't know how the question here you're being told to mention, but in other cases you can be told to explain, right? So don't read just one word. You can explain. Say drug abuse among the youth. There is mass media negative influence. There is also availability of contraceptives. Lack of proper sex education. It has to be proper. So lack of proper sex education, because people can offer sex education which is not proper. There is also pornography, poverty, leading to commercial sex workers. That is, leading to the youth being commercial sex workers. There is also permissiveness in the society, which is too much freedom in the society. Parents have abandoned their role of educating moral values. And most of you talked about unemployment, which makes the youth get lured into sex. So you get lured into sex in order to get employment, or in order to get money. So unemployment, which makes the youth to get lured into sex. Also, there is adults, promiscuous adults influencing the youth negatively. Promiscuous adults influencing the youth negatively. That's the adults who should serve as role models are themselves promiscuous, influencing the youth negatively. And then we have influence of peers, which we call what? Peer pressure. That was all about paper 1.